Well, Blake Corum continues to rack up career highs as we welcome in Anthony Bellino. You see him every morning right here on BCSN as part of the X's and Bros show. Anthony, thank you for joining us.
Mark, always a pleasure. Thank you so much for having me. Always good to talk about the Michigan Wolverines. Can't be 5-0 if you don't start off 4-0, my friend.
And they are undefeated thanks largely to Blake Corum. Of course, he had the 5-touchdown performance against Connecticut, and then he follows that up against Maryland with a career-high 30 rushes, 243 yards. He's leading the NCAA in touchdowns. We knew Blake Corum was good. Are you surprised he's been this good thus far?
Well, I mean, thank goodness he's been this good thus far. And I think that, what Michigan is asking of Blake Corum right now is kind of very similar to what they asked of Hassan Haskins last year. That was the really interesting kind of dynamic here, is the 1-2 punch. And obviously with an injury there and no Batman and Robin, it's been all Blake Corum. And I really thought CJ Stokes was doing a nice job early on, but he got one carry. He fumbled it away. Isaiah Gash had one carry for 2 yards, and that was it. Coach Harbaugh and company, they said, we're not going to play any games. We're not messing around. It's going to be a heavy dose of Blake Corum because the Maryland Terrapins decided to play their safety so deep. And they didn't really, one thing that I thought was very interesting, they didn't really adjust and throw a lot underneath. Now, J.J. McCarthy was 18 of 26 for 220 and a couple of touchdowns. One of those being to Schoonmaker that I thought was absolutely beautiful. It was a perfect route. It was right there, the 8 seconds into the game or whatever it was. And Schoonmaker got a lot of catches in this ball game. But because Maryland took away the deep ball, Michigan was looking for a way to find some sort of, I don't know, almost like cohesiveness within the offense. That came on the hands and the legs of Blake Corum. 30 carries for 243 and 2 touchdowns. He was phenomenal. He was consistent. He was exactly what the Wolverines needed in their first true test of the 2022 season.
Can we expect that type of production going forward? I don't think Jim Harbaugh wants to do that. I think you want to diversify your offense a little bit more. I suppose it's a great security blanket if you can just hand it off to Blake 30 times, but you have to wonder about the endurance and the beating he's taking because, as you alluded to, Donovan Edwards hasn't played the last couple of games, so you don't have a lot of depth behind Blake Corum.
Yeah, this is definitely not something that they want to continue. That much is for certain. 30 carries in a college football game is a lot of carries. And I think that if you're Michigan, you're looking at Donovan Edwards. If you absolutely needed him last week, could he have played? That's really the biggest question. I think that the consensus there is yes, but they felt like they were going to be comfortable enough to be able to go without him, give him one extra week because the next, it's only the sledding only gets tougher. And that's not a shot at Maryland. I think that when we look at college football, we really base college football upon our expectations, right? That's how we grade. That's how we gauge what teams are supposed to be. Michigan coming into the season, coming off of the Big Ten championship and their run to the college football playoff, the expectation was very, very high. That number 4 next to their school name, that's a good number. That's also very high in the country. When you look at a team like Maryland, what is the expectation for a team that's won double-digit games 4 times since 1976, right? It's to be competitive. I want to tip my cap here to Maryland and to their offensive coordinator. I said this to one of their trainers walking up the tunnel on Saturday. That man called a hell of a game. They really did. They threw the entire kitchen sink at the Michigan Wolverines. I liked it because they went with bubble screens. They went with running back screens. They went in a direction where they ran like a read option sort of shovel pass that I would love to see Michigan throw into their playbook because of what J.J. McCarthy provides with his legs. I thought Maryland called a great game offensively, especially early, to keep Michigan's defense on their toes. And we knew at that point, okay, the deep shots are really not working, and I'm okay with J.J. McCarthy overthrowing receivers. That's way better than underthrowing, so go ahead and chuck it as far as you can, young fella. But it was because of Blake Corum and his consistency there, the Wolverines were able to win this football game, because if you weren't connecting on that deep shot, you needed someone to carry the load, and that was Blake Corum.
We know the defense finally gave up some yardage, gave up some points against Maryland, but I think the impressive thing was in the second half, Maryland had a couple of drives where they could have tied it, they could have taken the lead, and the Michigan defense came up big with takeaways in those situations. So when the defense needed it, they were there.
Yeah, very much so. And, credit to Tagovailoa. I think that he is a Sunday type of talent. I think that he has that kind of pedigree. Obviously, his older brother, Tua's doing a fantastic job with the Miami Dolphins right now. And I think that he is that type of quarterback. You get Roman Hemby in there in the backfield, and they present a legitimate challenge. I mean, if you're a Michigan State fan, buckle your seatbelts, because this is a team that can run the ball, and they've got very capable perimeter weapons as well. So back to the Michigan point you're making there, that bend sort of don't break, come up with some timely turnovers, and you got to get to the quarterback. I thought that Michigan really struggled at that early on. They found a little mojo there on the defensive line. Mike Morris came in with a shot that would have sent me to the moon on Tagovailoa. He stood in there. He hobbled off the field. He came back. Not a big deal. But yeah, I mean, it's something that defensively they're going to be able to force turnovers if they can get to the quarterback. They did that very successfully in those first 3 non-conference, quote unquote, preseason games. Let's see if you can do it against Big Ten linemen now.
So now Michigan, for the first time this season, will leave the Big House as they head to Iowa to take on the 3-1 Hawkeyes, a rematch of last year's Big Ten championship game. Interestingly, Michigan has not won in Iowa since 2005. Now, they're not there every other year. It's only been 4 straight losses to Iowa, but still, it's been a long time since Michigan has beaten the Hawkeyes in Iowa.
Yeah, that streak's going to stop this weekend. I mean, Iowa's defense scored twice, and the Hawkeyes beat Rutgers 27-10 last week. The Hawkeyes are a 3-1 football team that are struggling offensively to score the football. I mean, they lost to Matt Campbell and the kids from Ames there, so shout out to the Cyclones, 10-7. They beat up on Nevada at 27-0, but the Nevada Wolfpack, not exactly NC State Wolfpack. They got in that 7-3, whatever that was, against South Dakota State to begin the season.
Multiple safeties.
Pardon me?
Multiple safeties.
Yeah, exactly. Multiple safeties in a field goal. I mean, for goodness sakes. And then 2 defensive scores against Rutgers. I absolutely don't think this is a time where you take your foot off the gas. Now you want to test Iowa's defense a little bit. Let's see if the Michigan Wolverines offense, if they have enough on the perimeter, which I do believe that they do, if they can establish the run game. If Donovan Edwards is available in this game, I think Michigan's defense is going to have an absolute field day with the Hawkeyes. At least they should, on paper, be able to win this matchup on Saturday. And I'm very interested. And I think that one thing that we saw back to that Maryland game that don't get caught up, because Iowa's defense, as much as I'm kind of poking fun at the fact that their defense scores as much as their offense, that does present a problem. And if you look at the Maryland tape, this is an issue that, I think that when Cade McNamara and J.J. McCarthy were coming out of camp, this is the one thing that the coaching staff knew with Cade McNamara. Odds are he's not going to take a negative play. He's going to get rid of it. If he gets sacked, he gets sacked, but you're not going to have any craziness. With J.J. McCarthy, there is very much that risk-reward factor because he is a superior athlete. That can get you into trouble. We saw that happen a couple times. They're faced with like a 2nd or 3rd and 25 in last week's game. He's got to know when to get rid of the football. You don't always have to make a mountain out of a molehill. Sometimes you just got to throw it away and live to play the other, the next play. Just chuck it out of bounds, get rid of the football, and instead of it being, 2nd and 25, let's look at 2nd and 10. That's a little bit more manageable. And I think that that's one of the real concerns that Michigan staff had with him, because yes, he is inexperienced when it comes to game action, and you can't take those type of losses. So I'm expecting Iowa to really bring a lot of pressure against J.J. McCarthy. We'll see how he responds, and the Michigan offensive line responds against the Hawkeyes on Saturday.
And part of that double-edged sword with McCarthy's ability to scramble is that sometimes means you leave your offensive lineman a little bit out on the ledge, and they end up holding because they don't know where you're going, and all of a sudden they got their hands outside the numbers, and you get that 2nd and long situation. That was something that Zach Zinter talked about on Monday, that the linemen have to be very cognizant of what McCarthy is doing and what that means with them to avoid some of those holding calls.
I once asked the great Lomas Brown, the Super Bowl champ. Now, he won that with the Giants, but we're not going to talk about that because we work together at the Lions, and I refer to him as Uncle Lomas because that's my guy. And I asked him, how did you ever block for Barry Sanders, right? Because you never knew where he was going to go. And Lomas's whole thing was you got to get your block, and you stand your block, and as long as you have your man, they're going to make the right decision behind you. You have to have faith in that. You have to have some trust in that. Obviously, it's a big shift for anybody who was taking those reps last year, whether it was in practice or whatever the case may be with Cade McNamara, but under center. Obviously, there's been some turnover there in the offensive line, but you have this idea of what that quarterback is, and now you have a completely different element in the backfield, especially taking snaps out of the gun. I mean, my goodness, he can go all over the place. It can be risky. It can be rewarding. It can be fun. It can make you want to rip your hair out. It can be all of those things. And I think that is probably what this coaching staff was looking at during that competition. And it is on the offensive lineman. maintain your block the best that you can. If he goes wild, and you can, get one of those non-blindside blocks, that thing where everybody's doing, where they're running around with their hands up like this, they're doing the raise the roof, trying to block somebody. If you got to do that, you got to do it, but you have to trust him that he's going to make the right read behind you.
The book on Iowa, particularly Iowa defensively, is they're fundamentally sound, that they're not going to make mistakes. They're almost going to wait for you to make a mistake and take advantage of it. Jim Harbaugh really went into a deep dive on the history of this Iowa defense, and basically saying it draws all the way back to Harbaugh's playing days with Norm Parker in the 80s at Iowa. And you can tell Harbaugh's got a lot of respect for what Kirk Ferentz has done and what Jim Parker has done defensively for the Iowa Hawkeyes. So it's going to be very much a Michigan best offense going up against Iowa's best, their defense.
Very much so. And I think that the way that Iowa has played defense so far is exactly what you'd expect when you have to travel out there to go see them. So, I'm glad that this game isn't in November. There's something really weird about going out to the cornfield in November. It never bodes very well. But Michigan's going to have to be disciplined. I think it's also very interesting, for our viewers here, watch the Michigan play calling, because there really isn't a set offensive coordinator. This is a job that's split up between a couple of guys, and I think what we're failing to see is some sort of cohesion, some sort of consistency within the play call. Sometimes they'll run some things you're like, oh man, I love that, keep it going, and then all of a sudden it's kind of like, well, did we really necessarily need to try that? They tried I think it was a sweep action. Was it Ronnie Bell that was going to throw the football down the field? I don't hate the idea of it, but we haven't seen that executed yet. You know what I mean? And I feel like that was one of those things like, hey, let's throw that out there and try it out. It's good to have it on tape, because now that, defenses have to be made aware that if he sets his feet, wait a minute, what's going over the top? But I think that when you look at the way Michigan's offense is running right now, one of the things that I'm definitely looking forward to Saturday is watching how the offense is called, and is there any cohesion and sort of purpose to their play calling?
Yeah, remember, it took a couple of years for Harbaugh and Josh Gattis to try and get on the same page to get that cohesiveness going offensively. So now you've got a third input in there as well. So I think that's an excellent point, Anthony. As the atmosphere at Kinnick Stadium is unbelievable. We saw the type of swagger Michigan took on the road last season, and the players are vowing that same type of confidence will carry over to this year. Saturday will be the first chance we can see if that's going to be true.
Yeah, and I was going to be mad. I think that score should be printed out and stapled all over the locker room and on everybody's locker, so that they remember exactly how badly they were embarrassed in the Big Ten championship game. I think you're going to see an angry Iowa team. You should see an angry Iowa team, and if they're not angry, and if they're not playing like their hair's on fire, and if they're not playing like they got a bone to pick with the maize and blue, then that's a bigger question on Iowa. Yeah, they have the wave there that they do with the Children's Hospital, which is always very special, and hat tip to them for continuing to do that. But it's going to be, they know what's on the line here. I mean, they're 3-1. They got a loss to their in-state rival. They know that their back's up against the wall. You could kind of sense blood in the water a little bit with Wisconsin, the way that they just got absolutely drubbed by Ohio State. But then you look a little bit to the west of Wisconsin, like, where does PJ Fleck? I mean, they rode the boats across 10,000 lakes and then across Lake Michigan into East Lansing and smoked the Spartans. Boy, that was beautiful to watch, wasn't it, Mark? But regardless, if you're Iowa, you know that it's all on the line right now. This is a massive, massive game for Kirk Ferentz and the Hawkeyes.
All right, thank you very much, Anthony Bellino. As we said, you see him every morning right here on BCSN with the X's and Bros Show. Anthony, thank you very much.
Oh, Mark, always a pleasure. Thank you, my friend.